Welcome to Socio-Witchery, a show about magic and meaning making. I'm Stacy, sociologist, witch, and energy worker. I talk about how to deepen our craft and our lives by unpacking the ideas and exploring meaning-making strategies underneath all kinds of magical workings. Today's topic is using the energy of Ostara to think about binaries, how they might be operating in your life, where you need balance, and ways to achieve that balance. I'll share a tarot spread, some altar ideas, recommendations for feminist comedy, and talk about the gender binary in magical discourse. I'm so glad you're here. Let's unpack and explore. Hi, folks, and welcome to today's show, Ostara, Balance, Binaries, Feminism, and the Ass End of Winter. I'm going to start with a little story today. When my daughter was little and whenever we were going on a car trip, she would, of course, at some point want to know how close we were to our destination. And very early on, rather than dealing with the "are we there yet" question every 5 minutes, I set up a system. So when we left the house, it was 1, and when our destination was 5. And then in between, I personified the numbers and we played a game with them. So when she wanted a check-in, I would say things like, 2 is knocking on 3's door, but 3 is still in the shower. Or 3's snuggling up to 4 on the couch, they're getting very close. And so making up these little stories with these personified points in our journey allowed me to keep the answers interesting for both of us, at least relatively interesting, but it still gave her the information that she wanted. So it was a game to keep it from getting tedious for me and make the waiting more bearable for her. So at Ostara, I'm thinking about that game. I'm kind of wanting someone to play that game for me. I've been asking for weeks now, and spring weather is 5, and Ostara is supposed to be 4, but it feels like about 2.5. Where I live, celebrating spring on March 20th feels a little bit like putting up a Christmas tree in October. It's going to be cold and gray and dreary pretty much until Beltane, if we're lucky. So at Imbolc, I'm hopeful and I'm feeling like, oh, it's midwinter and this is lovely. But at Ostara, I'm like, come on already. Of course, this is entirely regional. If you live in a warmer climate, you might experience this kind of malaise at Mabon, the autumn equinox, which is actually one of my favorite Sabbats where I am. So it depends on where you live. But for me, making Ostara feel special has been a bit of a challenge. And I don't focus on the regular Ostara things, which also makes it harder. They all feel very similar to Easter, of course, and it's all about spring energy. And I've just never been a big Easter person either, long before beginning to celebrate the wheel. But it's all similar stuff. Decorate eggs, make hot cross buns, symbolize spring with rabbits and pastels, cook complicated meals. If that works for you, then have at it. Those are all great ways to celebrate Ostara, but none of that is for me. But equinoxes, of course, are about cosmic duality and balance. The night and the day are of equal length for all of us all over the world, which I think is so cool. And so I focus on dualities and balance at Ostara, dark and light, sleep and wake, rest and action, work and leisure. And in the comments for this show, for the Imbolc episode, a friend of mine said something that I love. She said, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have it in front of me, but she said that at Imbolc, she thinks of us as if we're akin to hibernating bears and we turn over. We don't fully wake up exactly. We just kind of stir and move a little and turn over and then go back to sleep. And that really resonated for me. And it's been helping me to think of Ostara differently as the time when we, as the bears, can wake up and stretch and get back to living in the light. And I also like thinking about lambs at Ostara. I know a lot of people think about lambs at Easter and Ostara, but if you've ever seen lambs at this time of year, like in real life when they're only a few weeks old, you'll know that they might be the cutest things in the universe. They're definitely among the cutest things in the universe. All they do is frolic. They run and they leap and they do this sudden bounce straight up in the air thing, like they've just stepped on something that gave them a shock, and then all of a sudden they just go boop, and they just sort of leap up into the air and come back down, and it's just so freaking cute. But they're full of energy and they're full of life. So the idea of waking up as a big old bear after a long period of slumber and then shape-shifting into a playful, exuberant lamb over the season is really lovely. I like that metaphor a lot. And then it's just about finding ways to shake off the post-hibernation lethargy and access some of that joyful, frolicking lamb energy throughout Ostara. So I will say some things about altars and traditions and things to do, but first I just want to talk about some specific things that we can do at this time of year that can be useful for making that shift from bear to lamb, and also consistent with living according to the rhythms of the world, which is the point of the wheel. So obviously, Ostara is all about balance, an idea itself which is not at all my forte, and this is a lifelong struggle for me. I'm very much a person of extremes, and I use the equinoxes to really help me focus on that. So twice a year, I get to really focus on identifying and rectifying imbalances in my life by using the equinox energy. I do a kind of equinox wellness check. I look at how I've been spending my time, how my energy's been going, what's been occupying the real estate in my head, what I'm doing with my body, what I'm eating, how I'm sleeping. And like a lot of us probably, my imbalances are usually in the same directions. Yours will vary, but mine tend to be too much work and not enough play, too much sitting and not enough moving, and of course, given the time of year, too much inside, not enough outside, and relatedly, too much solitude and not enough social time. But I take stock anyway at the equinoxes because you never know what you're not noticing. So that's the first thing I recommend for you, is that you become aware of your imbalances. This could be just from sitting down with a notepad and having a think, or maybe you use an app to track your life minutes, or maybe you meditate on it, or you program your dreams about it, or maybe you do a tarot spread. I have an equinox spread that I like to do at Maven and Ostara, which I'll describe. It's very simple. It's a simple 3-card spread that represents a scale. So I put the first card on the left vertically, and I put it closer to me, closer to the bottom of the table or the surface than the middle, to symbolize a heavier weight. And this is position 1. And the question I ask is, what is overrepresented in my life right now? So you might say, what am I giving the most weight to? Or what do I have too much of? But I think about it as what is overrepresented in my life. And then on the right side, but a little higher up to symbolize a lighter weight, I ask what is underrepresented in my life now. And then in the middle, horizontally, representing the balance of the scale, is position 3. And my question is usually something like, what do I need to know or think about in order to achieve balance between these two? So just a small note on this. I don't pay attention to reversals in the spread because I'm already using the positions to ask what I need more of and less of. And if I add reversals to the spread, I get very confused. It can end up being a bunch of double negatives. I'm not good enough yet to figure all that out. And so my solution when doing a balance spread like this, where the positions are already, in a sense, taking care of the reversals, is just to treat everything like an upright card. If there are tarot purists out there who want to yell at me about that, feel free to do so. I also like to think about the elements at this time of year and make sure that elemental energies are at least close to equilibrium in my life. I'll just pay attention to, have I been living in my head and I'm all rational analysis and air energy, or have I been feeling rigid and resistant to new ideas and projects and all earth energy? Am I lacking follow-up and drive? Maybe I need more fire in my life right now. Or have I been really watery, kind of following my feelings around throughout my days and not really imposing structure on my time? Whatever way you choose to think about it, hopefully you'll come away with some awareness of where you need balance, and you'll adjust where you need to specifically based on what you've learned. And then it's time to work on that balance. So I'll share a couple of my favorite general balancing practices, ones that you might find helpful to incorporate into your Ostara season, regardless of what you found about where you need balance. So a chakra balancing meditation or an app that you can do on your own. The one that I use is Jonathan Goldman Chakra Tuner, and it's simple and it's quick, and you just go through the chakras and you sing the notes that vibrate in different parts of your body, and I always feel a difference once I've gone through the notes. I also use it diagnostically, which is interesting. I get information from how difficult it is for me to sustain the note in a particular area. So I recommend that. There are also videos on YouTube that work with sounds that vibrate through the body. And there's meditations on the Insight Timer app, which is probably my favorite meditation app. It's pretty easy to find something that uses sound to help you feel balanced in your body. And I try to do this throughout the year regularly, but you know how it goes. So I think that equinoxes are really good times to make sure that I'm kind of getting my energy balancing tune-ups. The other thing that I try to do at least once during the season is to get an acupuncture session. You might also get a massage or a chiropractic adjustment, a reflexology session or a Reiki session, anything that's different from what you normally do and that you can use to really think about balance in your body, whether you're thinking about your energy flow or your spine or your chakras. Treating yourself to a session that helps you feel grounded and centered and open-minded and everything in between is going to help you with your reset for spring. Again, going back to Emily's bear metaphor. Thank you, Emily, if you're listening to this. Thank you for that metaphor. I really like it. But going back to that metaphor, we've all had this stagnant, sleepy energy, and we're getting up and preparing to sort out our energetic kinks, so to speak. And if you can't schedule something with a professional, then you can do a self-energy session, either with crystals or meditation or sound, whatever helps you to feel more balanced. And then beyond the general level, I attend to the specific imbalances in my life. So if you're thinking about elements and you realize, for example, that you need more fire, then you can prioritize that at or maybe throughout the entire season of Ostara. In that case, you might do a bonfire if it's warm enough outside, or you can do a fire spell indoors to bring more fire into your life, or scatter your favorite fire herbs. If you do that, it's really nice to do that wherever heat comes into your living space. Like you can tie cinnamon and cloves, a little muslin bag of cloves or a cinnamon stick in front of your heating grates, and that's very nice. Or you can just make sure that you light some candles every day for a while, or you can create a sun altar specifically to bring more fire energy into your life, and so on and so on. If you want more ideas for balancing specific elements, let me know. And I can do an episode on balancing elements or bringing more elemental energy into your life, or I can put it in the description. But for now, I'll assume that you've got the gist. So in thinking about my own imbalances this year and starting to do the work of balancing, I've been thinking a lot about playfulness and laughter. I think most of us need that more than we get it most of the time. But for me, playfulness and laughter is very important. And so I've been thinking about bringing that in. And since Ostara is close to April Fool's Day, there's actually some talk about the interweb of the two sharing origins and being linked to the craziness of spring weather, actually. That's probably all revisionist history, but I like it as a narrative frame. Not saying it's true, but thinking about those things together, the unpredictability of the weather and the April Fool, the idea of the clown and the jester, and the beginning of spring. It helps me when I'm reaching for my frolicking lamb energy while I'm all still creaky, lumbering, sleepy bear. So this year, in keeping with these imbalances that I see in my own life, with the idea of the playful lamb energy and with the connection to April Fool's Day, I'm going to build my Ostara, the day itself, around what I'm thinking of as the reemergence of the jester. And just a quick aside here, if you work with Loki as an archetype or as a deity, this might be a great fit for you as well, depending on how you think about Loki. But for me, I'm doing a media laughathon on Ostara, along with a pretty elaborate spell to bring more playfulness and laughter into my life. This year, Ostara falls just before the new moon, during the balsamic moon or the dark moon, actually, which I think makes it more special. I know that people differ on whether and when to cast spells during a dark moon. For me, it depends on what other correspondences are happening, on what meanings I can make from what planets the moon is in or what day of the week it is and that kind of thing. What else can I play around with? But I'm looking at light as laughter, at the binary between work and play, and bringing together Ostara and April Fool's Day with the idea of the jester or the clown and the frolicking, playful, comical lamb. My mother also loved clowns, so bringing this together is actually a really nice way for me to commemorate her throughout the season, which makes the time feel more special for me personally. So for those of you who like specifics, here are some of the details about my own Ostara celebration this year in case it helps you find inspiration or ideas. For my altar, I have a special altar designated for changing at each Sabbath. So for my Ostara altar, I'm not big on pastels in general, so I do stick with the light greens from Imbulk. I add a little blue, probably a deeper blue than most of you work with at Ostara. I add a little kind of a royal blue, and then maybe just a smidge of pink somewhere, usually with crystals as accents, and the candles or flowers I keep as green and blue. For Ostara, for crystals, I like watermelon tourmaline, flower agate, and unakite. These are all pink and green, but they're also considered very balancing stones, so I think they're perfect for Ostara. And this year, I'm also putting up a small clown figurine. And I buy flowers at Ostara. Usually tulips are in the stores at this time here, so I put those on my dining table and then just one or two in a very small kind of a bud vase on my Ostara altar. And then I'm going to do my laughathon on Ostara, Day of Laughter. I'm extremely picky about the shows and films that I watch in terms of feminist or misogynist messages. I'll say much more about this in later shows, but for now, I just want to let you know that my suggestions for films and TV will nearly always not only feature women in prominent roles that are unproblematic from a feminist perspective, but they'll be about women and women's stories. I'm way past the Bechdel test as my standard for media consumption. And the Bechdel test is a great tool. I love it for all sorts of reasons, but I've got a bunch of other criteria. And if you don't know what the Bechdel test is, I'll link it. Well, I don't know whether you know, so I'll link it regardless in the description. But it's basically just kind of a litmus test to let you know the extent to which women are peripheral in this film or TV show. But a lot of films that people talk about as feminist, or you see these things on these BuzzFeed lists or whatever on the internet, and they'll say, top 10 feminist films, and they'll say that because they feature women or because they're full of women, but they're also full of problematic and misogynist messages. So just because a film is full of women or about women does not make it feminist. Anyway, all that in another episode. But for me, women have to be at the center of the story as well as a whole host of other things. So all these criteria for my media consumption certainly limit my options. Trust me, I know. But I'm going to just share with you for the purposes of this episode, in case you need more playfulness and laughter in your life and an Ostara media marathon sounds good to you, I'll share with you some of my favorite comedies that I find at least acceptably feminist, and some of which I'll probably also talk more about in the future. And I don't know where they are. I don't know what streaming services they're on. I'm just going to throw them at you right now. Just some of my favorites and things that I'll be choosing from to watch this year. Okay, so in terms of films, my recommendations are Palms, Girls Trip, Spy, that's the Melissa McCarthy Spy, Good Luck to You, Leo Grande. I can't remember in the film, and this is actually one I know is going to make it to the Ostara Laughathon because I only watched it once, and it was when it first came out. And I can't remember whether they pronounce it Leo Grande or Leo Grand. It's a British film, so it might be Leo Grand. But it's fabulous and quite funny. And Fun Mom Dinner. And then if you've not seen it yet, and I know it just made a whole big splash, which really surprised me. I didn't surprise anyone in the world but me. But Everything, Everywhere, All at Once is absolutely fantastic. It's the most feminist thing I've seen in decades. I really, really love it. And so if that might be your jam, give that a try. And then a couple of others that I have a little caveat for. Where'd You Go, Bernadette? Cate Blanchett is a fun movie. The book is much, much better, as is usually the case. So I'm a little hesitant to recommend it, but I also love Cate Blanchett. So I would give that a look. And again, Melissa McCarthy, Identity Thief. My caveat there is that it doesn't quite even pass the Bechdel test, really. And while Melissa McCarthy's character is certainly not peripheral to the story, the forward driving mechanism is Jason Bateman's character, which is usually the case in Jason Bateman's movies, a bone I have to pick with the decisions that he makes. But it's fun and it's funny and it's acceptably feminist from my perspective. And then if you like stand-up comedy or performative comedy, like not plot-driven, I recommend Wanda Sykes' Not Normal, Katherine Ryan's Glitter Room, and Bridget Everett, Gynecological Wonder. Bridget Everett is not safe for work or children, but she's fantastic. She's just so funny, and it's a very specific type of humor. If body comedy is not your thing, then don't watch Gynecological Wonder. But if it is, that's a great Ostara thing to watch. And then for TV shows, just a few off the top of my head. I didn't actually think too much about this, but I love Veep with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Bad Sisters, which is an Irish show that Sharon Horgan, I think, is behind. Absolutely fantastic and funny. Somebody Somewhere is Bridget Everett again, and then Life and Beth is Amy Schumer. I know these days that Amy Schumer is kind of a divisive character among feminists, but she has a special place in my heart, and I like Life and Beth. Okay, so those are my recommendations should you want to do a little laughathon for yourself. And then I'm doing my new moon spell to bring in more laughter and play. I'm not going to share all the details of it here. I think that spell crafting is just so individual and so personal that I'm not sure how useful it is for people to share that kind of thing. But if I'm wrong about that and you want the details, let me know. And I'll either add it to the description below, or maybe I'll do an episode with specific spells. And then, of course, I know people like to think about food and drink at the Sabbats. So I don't do that all that much, but here's a couple of thoughts about that. So if you heard the In-Bulk episode, you might remember that I went off on this little tangent about oats. At Ostara, I'm not feeling oats, and I'm going for spring greens, specifically peas and asparagus, neither of which is very exciting and not nearly as yummy as oats. But I'm probably just trying to remind myself that it's spring, and peas and asparagus remind me of spring. And as you also know, if you listen to that show, I don't like to cook, so it's generally not part of my Sabbath celebrations to think about food at all. But sometimes I do get a bug up my butt to make something special, and if I cook for Ostara, it'll probably be shepherd's pie, because that's simple enough to do in the Instant Pot. And then all the cooks out there are horrified. But it's easy enough. I can throw it all in the Instant Pot and then just put it together and cook it up as a casserole. And I like it for Ostara because it's got a winter hardiness, and so it's got that comfort to it that I'm still needing when it's 20 degrees outside. But I use lentils and peas and asparagus and sometimes fresh herbs, so that feels a little bit like it's ushering in spring. But that's if I feel like cooking. And if I'm feeling really ambitious at Ostara, I might also make mushy peas, which I fell in love with when I was living in the UK. It has to be mushy peas with mint, though. But that requires soaking and then cooking and then chopping mint and then mashing things up. And I really, very, very rarely want to bother with all that. I'm tired just saying that. But if you like cooking those, if you like doing those things, minted mushy peas are really lovely at Ostara, I think. Okay, so moving away from details and back to themes. In keeping with thinking about binaries and balance, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk just for a few minutes about the gender binary and magic. Last week, when I mentioned this episode in the little preview at the end of last show, I had planned to talk about gender and witchcraft more in depth, but then I realized that it's really too much to get into in the same show as Ostara, and I was trying to do too much in one episode. So today, just in keeping with the theme, I'm just going to toss out a couple of thoughts related to the gender binary itself. First, I suspect that most of us have read or heard or even said things that reflect a kind of mapping of the sun and the moon onto the gender binary, the sun being understood as masculine and the moon as feminine. This is certainly not new, and it's not unique to witchcraft or witchy culture, but it's pretty much everywhere. And it's a discourse that essentializes gender, by which I mean that it views differences between people's personalities or people's inclinations as being related to their gender, and gender as a binary of masculine and feminine. It's interesting to me that even as we as a culture and as a world are moving away from essentializing sex differences, right? We're in the process of uncoupling gender from sex, but we continue to believe, and in some ways we're even doubling down on, the belief that masculine and feminine are two different and diametrically opposed ways of being in the world, with particular associated characteristics that we also derive from the gender binary. And the uncoupling of gender and sex might actually explain, to some extent anyway, the doubling down on that belief. But it's interesting regardless. So in this line of thinking, the sun is active and action-oriented, and the moon is more reflective and mysterious. And while it might actually be useful for magic and for our lives to think about the sun and the moon in that way, the extension of those traits to people, to masculinity and femininity, I think are very much not helpful in understanding people, at least sociologically, as products of our culture, rather than being products of our sex or gender. And we do this with the idea of nature and the natural world as a whole, of course, right? I mean, it's tough to draw from ancient cultures and ancient religious beliefs without buying into the archetype of Mother Nature or Mother Earth. And I know that for a lot of people, these ideas are core to their spirituality and to their magical practices. But these ideas also essentialize particular traits. The idea of Mother Nature boils womanhood down to an essence, something natural, something innate in the bodies or souls of women. And as a sociologist, I come from a social constructionist standpoint, and that means that I proceed from the assumption that who we are is a product of the social world, right? Kind of like what people mean by nurture when they talk about the nature-nurture debate. And from a constructionist perspective, the idea that womanhood or femininity or intuition or pretty much anything to do with personality or inclinations is somehow something innate in the souls of women or in the bodies of women or wherever it's supposed to be in women, that bolsters and solidifies what I think are really at core misogynist ideas about women, that we're mysterious, that we're in fact not comprehensible, that we're unpredictable, prone to unreasonable bouts of emotion, wrath, and fury. And it's a kind of power, but it's a power wrapped up in all of these misogynist ideas. And of course, it also reinforces the idea that the most fundamental, central, most significant role of women or aspect of femininity is that of the mother. One of the things that I like about the triple goddess symbolism is that it seems more flexible this way, right? The maiden, the mother, and the crone, at least on the surface. But it's still often framed not as three different models of womanhood, but as a progression, as a movement through the life course. And so really the story is first you're young, then you bear children, then you're old. So the maiden and the crone are relative ages, young and old. But the middle one isn't an age, it's a role. It's motherhood, and it's central, and it's bookended by merely being too young or too old to bear children. So you have the young woman, the old woman, and in between the mother. And there are all sorts of issues with that, which I won't unpack right now, but it's part of a larger gendered thinking that underlies quite a bit of the dominant kind of neo-pagan witchy discourse. And then once we've got that kind of gender binary, like the sun is masculine and the moon is feminine, it's pretty easy to see that these are set up not as merely opposites, but also as complementary. So there's not only a gender essentialist paradigm at work in a lot of our discourse, but also a heterosexist one. The idea that these opposites, masculine and feminine, also kind of need each other to be a whole. And again, this is not new. We did not invent these ideas. And we're drawing from very old traditions and very old texts, and I understand that. But our world is changing, and I think it's incumbent on us to think about the kinds of messages that we're drawing and making meaning from and centering in our lives. So the fact that we might not be holding people to these archetypes or locating them within gender typologies based on genitals anymore, or at least less so, right, to less of an extent, it doesn't mean necessarily that we're not still basing our understandings of magic, of the natural world, of the cosmos, of our own relationship to magic on this foundational belief that men and women are naturally, essentially, spiritually, psychically different from each other. You know, in the 70s and 80s, this kind of thinking in feminist theory was called goddess feminism. And it was understood, at least by many feminist thinkers, as a kind of trap. Because once you subscribe to the idea that women are naturally different kinds of people, more sacred, more intuitive by virtue of our bodies or our souls or our abilities, more magical, once you do that, you're on an awfully slippery slope that slides pretty directly into the same kinds of arguments that have propped up the white supremacist patriarchy pretty much forever, right? The only egalitarian place you can go from that kind of thinking is separate but equal, and we all know that that doesn't hold up. So these gender binaries in the witchy discourse trouble me, and I find that it can take a bit of conscious work to resist the underpinnings, to claim a witch identity as a feminist move, without falling into what I see as an essentialist trap. To me, witchiness or witchery or witchcraft as a part of feminist identity or a piece of feminist identity work, and I'm not saying it inherently is or it has to be, just that when it is, it's about recognizing paths of all kinds that were and were not historically available to women. What kinds of education, work, religious roles, and physical spheres were open to women. And then about recasting and reclaiming particular epistemologies, certain ways of knowing and certain kinds of knowledge. It's about challenging the assertions and assumptions that Euro-patriarchal knowledge is the only legitimate frame for knowledge. If my craft is rooted in some essence that is mine or that is different from me because of my parts or because of my secondary sex characteristics or because of my gender identity, then that props up the very same essentialist idea on which Euro-patriarchy is built, that men and women are naturally predisposed in different and specific directions because of different innate traits. So when I think about binaries at the equinoxes, I think about the applicability of ideas like day and night, lightness and darkness, sleep and wake, work and leisure, birth and death. I view the gender binary as a kind of cop-out, as a shorthand for other traits, and so I try to parse those out. For example, sometimes people mean active and passive, or outward and inward, or rigid and fluid, or hard and soft, and masculine and feminine become these kind of buckets into which all of these get placed, and I like to take them out of the buckets because these are ideas and energies that I think are important to acknowledge and contemplate in our lives, to work with and to balance. But thinking about them as masculine and feminine is just rife with problems that I think ultimately work against all of us, not only witches, but people. So I hope that you found some useful bits in all this for your approach to Ostara, or your approach to both equinoxes, or for your next Netflix night, or in thinking about gender, feminism, and witchery. And I wish all of you a really lovely awakening, reset, or transition into spring. And of course, I also hope that you'll join me for next Wednesday's show, in which I'll continue the theme of media. I'll be raving about some of my favorite contemporary representations of magical women in fiction and nonfiction, film and TV. A couple of things I've mentioned today may come up again, but mostly it'll be other works. So I hope you'll come on back. Thanks for being here. Have a beautiful week, and happy Ostara, everyone.